must be putting me on.
Dylan was this mythical creature who revolutionised music, rock music, pop music, folk music, everything. Between 1962 and 1966, he made 7 albums. Each one was radically different from the last. He completely changed folk music. He made folk music political. He changed rock music. He made rock music poetic and mysterious and allegorical and mystical.
His influence is unparalleled, and nearly every musician looks up to him. He's quoted forever as being the spokesman of a generation and the influencer of everyone who's followed him.
He's an artist who thrives on spontaneity. He hates going back and doing the same song twice, never mind spending 4 hours getting a drum sound and then overdubbing another vocal. That's not the way he likes to work.
He believes in spontaneity. He believes in there being something that you can't recapture. A lot of his recordings have been like that. His classic albums have happened when he's walked into the studio with a bunch of songs and a bunch of musicians who for some reason have just connected. And it just happened.
Dylan's genius is fascinating because of the quality of the songs in their own right. And it is always worth restating that songs that were considered topical have lasted so far beyond their own era.
It should also be mentioned that Dylan still performs, and you never know what you're going to get on any given night. There's always the next show.
You're never quite sure what anybody sees in a budding young artist because they're seeing what no one else can see. I would say about John Hammond, the man who discovered Bob Dylan, or made Bob Dylan into a recording artist, is that his track record makes him possibly the most credible music talent spotter of the 20th century. He's spanned decades through blues, jazz, into folk, rock. The list of artists he worked with is just astronomical.
Famously, he helped record and popularize Billie Holiday and Count Basie and Bessie Smith and Charlie Christian. He was also a leading figure on the left in American politics and helped eliminate racism from the recording industry. So he was very much a prophet. And his discovery of Dylan quite late in his life and quite early in Dylan's life is another in these amazing strings.
Of course, you know, it was Bob Dylan. I mean, who wouldn't have recognised him? Who wouldn't have discovered him? But it really wasn't that simple. I mean, you know, for a good year or so, you know, Dylan had been trudging around the sort of Greenwich Village clubs, and it took John Hammond, you know, to spot something, and, you know, in the look, in the sound.
I think what he saw in Dylan at the time is what some of Dylan's friends and colleagues down in the Greenwich Village where he was living also saw, which was an incredibly distinctive performer.
Well, I'm looking for and more, I believe I'm fixing to die. Well, I'm looking for and more, I believe I'm fixing to die. Well, I don't mind dying, but I hate to leave my children crying.
Remember, at this point, Dylan isn't doing his own songs. He's doing older songs. And I think what Hammond sees in that is an intensity of personality that takes the old music and makes it new. So Hammond didn't see in him, for example, a virtuoso guitar player, although he was very good, nor at that stage an original songwriter, but someone who lived a song in a way that his contemporaries did not.
Well, I'm looking for and more, I believe I'm fixing to die, fixing to die.
So when a man like John Hammond says, as soon as I saw Bob Dylan, I knew I had to sign him on the spot. He had charisma. You know he must have seen it and heard it.
He approached Columbia and said, look, I found this guy. And they said, well, you know, what's he like? And he said, well, he may not sell you a lot of records, but he's got profound things to say. And remarkably, they you know, without hearing a note of Dylan's music, you know, Columbia signed him up.
And now you're doing a record for Columbia.
Yeah, I made it already. It's coming out next month. Or not next, yeah, it's coming out in March.
And what's it going to be called?
Bob Dylan, I think.
That's a novel title for a record.
Yeah, it's pretty strange.
I mean, basically what informed the first Dylan album, very simply, Woody Guthrie. I mean, you know, the entire album is steeped in Guthrie. I mean, it's well known that Dylan was obsessed with the man at this point, had become a friend right up to his death. I mean, become very, very close. And the record suffers for that. You're listening to a record where Dylan is yet to really find his own distinctive voice.
It's said that Dylan only decided at the very last minute, when he turned up in the studio that John Hammond had booked for him, that he was going to play these particular songs, and that he'd actually previously given Hammond a list of completely different songs. I think one of the striking things about the songs he chooses is how many of them are really old man songs.
Well, there's a black smoke rising, Lord, it's rising up above my head, up above my head.
It's almost as if Dylan is trying to measure himself against these enormous giant figures of folk and blues music whom he's grown up with.
There were two original songs, one called Song for Woody about his hero Woody Guthrie, and another one called Talkin' New York. And both songs are heavily influenced by Woody Guthrie, ironically. The rest of the album covers, some of them House of the Rising Sun, for instance, which is never associated with Dylan, but had been around for many decades. The Animals possibly made the most famous version, at least as far as us Brits are concerned. And another song called Man of Constant Sorrow, which I do believe was the first song he performed on TV in America.
I am a man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my days. I'll say goodbye to Colorado, where I was born and partly raised.
These days you say Man of Constant Sorrow to people, they probably think of anything of Oh Brother Where Art Thou, because it's in that film. But it was a very low-key affair. I know Dylan spent ages trawling through so many different records and trying different songs to see whether they fitted for size and whether he could adapt them to his own particular style. But the overall feel of it was very much a low-key folk album.
Ice and snow, sleet and rain.
He was asked, you know, why only two of his own songs, when at that time he was a fairly prolific songwriter. I mean, not to the extent that he became in the mid-60s. But he said very simply, I didn't want to reveal too much of myself at that point. You think he'd be thrilled at the idea of, you know, signing up to Columbia Records and would therefore be kind of malleable. But already at that point he was like, no, this is what I'm going to do.
This isn't a guy who's trying merely to imitate the records he's seen in the past, but to enter into them and recreate them as emotional experiences.
His big saving grace was that it cost $400 to record and was done over just 2 days. So it was very low budget, it was low maintenance, so there wasn't a need to recoup a huge advance. Because at the time, John Hammond was put under enormous pressure. In fact, Dylan was known as John Hammond's Folly.
John Hammond had been through enough so that didn't in the least deter him from recording the second album. However, in between the two, Dylan really explodes as an original songwriter. And that is partly, and perhaps principally, the impact of the civil rights and peace movements at the time.
Oh, the time will come up when the winds will stop and the breeze will cease to be breathing. Like the stillness in the wind before the hurricane begins, the hour that the ship comes in.
The sit-ins by young African-American people in the South, people exactly Dylan's age, stir his imagination. They give him the confidence to say something new, to put new words to old songs, and they also give him an audience, which it's important to stress at this stage is a small minority audience, but is the beginning of something that by the end of the 60s has become a genuine mass phenomenon. And that's a key part of the story of Dylan, that he starts as the voice of a small minority, and rather against his will becomes the voice of a huge number.
And the words that are used for to get the ship confused will not be understood as they're spoken, for the chains of the sea will have busted in the night and be buried on the bottom of the ocean.
His first protest song, which he never got around to putting on any album, Death of Emmett Till, he writes in February of '62, and within a few months he's written Oxford Town, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Masters of War, With God on Our Side, Hattie Carroll. That's all within 18 months, and I've left out another 20. To some extent, John Hammond is trying to keep up with Dylan by scheduling more and more recording sessions at which Dylan can lay down his new music. He's also at this point establishing a tremendous cult reputation in the coffee houses of New York and other major cities as an absolutely unique performer, and beginning to perform at the bigger venues.
The effect of all of this coming out from one person was quite extraordinary at the time, and it changed Dylan from being just another person in the village to being a kind of folk superstar.
His finger finds the trigger to his name. His head will hit out in the dark. The hand set the spark. Two eyes took the aim. Behind him and green. But he ain't plain. He's only a pawn in their game.
When you see footage of Dylan performing around that time, I mean, basically there's a key ingredient, I think, lacking, which is very simply charisma. I think he'd yet to really find a way of expressing that, and I think there's something about those kind of early shots of Dylan, that early footage of Dylan, where there's a kind of shyness there. There's a real hesitancy, which are not words that you really associate with a great man, but far from, when you think of Dylan in the mid-60s, and particularly the Don't Look Back period, where he just radiates this kind of almost supernatural cool and this something bordering on arrogance, but isn't quite arrogance. It's too cool to be arrogance, but it's basically a man in control. The early footage is quite curious, because he's clearly, as an artist, not yet fully formed and a little bit unsure of himself, not yet comfortable with the mic. He's singing away from the microphone. He hasn't quite kind of mastered those basic, simple technical things. But I think more than that, the overall thing, I think Dylan hasn't yet found himself, and he's kind of unsure, and I think that comes through.
And he's told how to walk in a pack.
You heard something interesting, because the guy's voice was original, it was unique, and there was something interesting in the way he had attacked the material, but he hadn't yet, maybe he never did, become comfortable with the camera, so that when he did his early performances, he seemed very small and very shrunken into the stage, as if he'd like to be somewhere else. Now, I never saw him live in those days, even I was too young, but people who did see him live said there was something very charismatic and very strident about him, something very purposeful, so that the Dylan you saw on stage seemed to be very different to the Dylan you saw on the screen.
Before she sleeps in the sand, yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're full of a band? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
In about the spring of 1962, he writes a song called Blowin In The Wind. That is quickly given by his manager, Albert Grossman, to a new group called Peter, Paul and Mary, who then have a huge hit with it. Now, no one had expected this to happen. The idea that there would be a top 40, top 10 AM radio hit, which made references to the struggle for civil rights, to the campaign to ban the bomb. This was contrary to all commercial wisdom.
Must a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
He becomes famous as the author of Blowin In The Wind, and Blowin In The Wind is rapidly taken up as a standard almost, along with We Shall Overcome and Eyes on the Prize, at civil rights rallies and folk hootenannies.
Critics, you prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no telling who that it's naming, or the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are changing.
When people talk about the Times They Are A-Changin album, I think it's kind of easy, again, to kind of pigeonhole that as kind of, it's Dylan's great protest record. And I think there's a kind of misunderstanding there. I think by that time, I think Dylan had become noticeably pessimistic about politics.
He seemed to get very bored very quickly with whatever he was doing, and we move into other areas. And I think that's what happened with the third album, The Times They Are Changing, which was a very downbeat record. It was a very dark record, certainly the darkest of his early material. He was talking about the disintegration of mining and farming communities, for instance. The song, The Ballad of Hollis Brown. How many other people would have written a song about a very poor farmer in South Dakota who's so poor that eventually he thinks the only way out is to kill his family and himself? That's bleak.
You look for work and money and you walk a ragged mile. You look for work and money and you walk a ragged mile. Your children are so hungry that they don't know how to smile.
It's Dylan's tone in it which kind of starts creeping in on this album, where I think there's almost like a kind of wry detachment, which would remain with him through quite, a number of subsequent albums. This was no longer just Dylan, the protest singer. He was no longer just one thing. I think by this point, Dylan had become, most definitely, an artist who came in many shapes and forms.
The rats have got your flower, bad blooded got your mare.
Even when he's doing ostensibly kind of, protest, kind of, socially realistic songs like, The Ballad of Hollis Brown, he sounds strangely bemused, almost kind of detached, like already, he realized that he was far more interested and concerned with, if you like, revolutionizing himself than revolutionizing the culture or achieving great social reform through songs. I think he kind of realized that it was time to get playful, and I think the playfulness of that album has been underestimated greatly.
What young musicians are advised to do is not to depress their audiences. Generally, commercial wisdom is you want to cheer people up. And here's Dylan taking the exact opposite tack. He's taking a mysterious song, a demanding song. His performance of it's stunning, in fact. A song with a lot of ambiguities, and just living it out again. And I think that's what's striking about the guy, is his intuitive going against the grain, and you can see that from then right through the rest of his career, sometimes quite perversely.
Grass is turning black, there's no water in your well. Your grass is turning black, there's no water in your well. You spent your last long dollar on 7 shotgun shells.
That's not all there is to this album. This album includes One Too Many Mornings. It includes Restless Farewell. And these are not songs about politics. They're not protest songs. They're absolutely brilliantly written, complex songs about an inner world that Dylan is beginning to explore.
But I think some of it was trying to express his frustration with where he was. He wanted to move forward and didn't seem to quite know how to do it.
When Dylan went electric, it seemed an almost unbelievable shock to people at the time. But in fact, he spent his career confounding expectations. When he was dubbed the Prince of Protest and he was singing his protest songs, he quickly moved away from that and sang songs about leaving the protest movement and indeed disliking it, and wrote a transitional album called Another Side of Bob Dylan.
He and a couple of friends got in a car and drove across America. 3 weeks, or just under 3 weeks. They covered the whole of America, picking up stories as they went along, which Dylan turned into songs. Also at that time, Dylan had started to experiment with LSD a little bit. The result was an album that some people see as more humorous, more human, but also took him into a completely new area. And it was his break with folk music. It was the moment when the folk cognoscenti, the critics, the hoi polloi of the folk industry, disowned him.
Simplify might defy or crucify you. All I really wanna do is, baby, be friends with you.
He came up with a very, very interesting album. An album full of intriguing songs, produced by Tom Wilson, and incredibly enough, possibly the most amazing fact of all, an album recorded in one day.
Another side of Bob Dylan is the first truly hip record that he made. Despite all its faults, there was something really sharp, really sassy. It kind of introduced a new Bob Dylan that was kind of so full of himself that he could barely contain himself.
Normally, when people break from their youthful radicalism, what they say is, well, I was young then, now I'm more realistic, now I'm more mature, now I've seen the way of the world. A viewpoint for which I have no sympathy. What I love about Dylan is that he says the opposite. He says, I was older then, and I'm breaking with politics because I'm younger now, because I'm uncertain. And he embraces uncertainty as a condition, as a means of being free, as a means of creating himself. And here's one of the ironies. In rejecting protest, in rejecting politics, in saying, don't label me, don't pigeonhole me, I just want to be what I want to be, he became exactly what he was trying to escape from, a representative spokesperson for his generation. Because the irony was that having left his folk and political audience behind, he then gained an even bigger audience for even more complicated, demanding, and challenging music.
I ain't looking to meet your kin, make you spin, or do you in. And I ain't looking for you to feel like me, see like me, or be like me. All I really wanna do is, baby, be friends with you.
People could hear there was something special stirring here. It's not just about a very talented performer, it's about a unique songwriter who was capturing the spirit of the time, but was actually moving it forward as well. He wasn't just speaking about a generation, he was starting to speak for a generation.
One of the interesting things is that a year before Dylan famously goes electric, he had already antagonized a very substantial portion of his original audience in the folk revival, in the songs on Another Side, because of the content of the songs, because of the inwardness of the songs. This was already controversial in the folk revival. What's Bob doing? He's not writing about social justice anymore. He seems to be just writing about himself. How scandalously self-indulgent. When he then turns to rock and roll, that just exacerbates the division. But I think it's important to see that, and Dylan never abandoned folk music, and that becomes clearer as the older he gets. I mean, the last few albums have essentially been folk albums, and nobody of his generation absorbed folk a greater diversity or in greater depth the existing heritage of American music, and he's constantly reworking it.
You know, I like folk music as Hobart Smith stuff and that, but I don't sing much of that. When I do, it's probably a modified version of something. Not a modified version, I don't know how to explain it. It's just that there's more to it. I think old type jazz things, Jelly Roll Morton, and stuff like that.
Another side of Bob Dylan did two things. It ended his association with the past, and something he'd been trying to do for a couple of albums, I have to say, and it opened up folk to a new era. It opened up folk to folk rock, and therefore almost gave the world a new form of folk, which is to be taken so far forward by bands like the Byrds and so forth.
And so what he does when he goes electric is to take all of those folk sources, not abandon them, but heighten them and give it a broader musical palette.
Bring It All Back Home, I believe, was the moment he really completely cut off his roots. It was taking another side of Bob Dylan to the next level. It was, right, now is the time when I'm going to record an album that really takes me away from the folk roots completely. It's got things like Subterranean Homesick Blues, obviously, on there, and his version, finally, of Mr. Tambourine Man.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy, and there is no place I'm going to. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. In the jingle jangle morning, I'll come following you.
Mr. Tambourine Man's an interesting song. It's extraordinarily popular because of the Byrds version, but I don't think it's anything like the song that Dylan did, and Dylan's song attracts people. It's like moths to a flame because you can interpret it on so many levels. People will tell you it's a drug song, people will tell you it's a song to amuse, people will tell you it's a song to a woman. People will describe to you what each character in the song is meant to represent and who it is. Dylan himself, of course, is not revealing very much about it.
Feel to grip, my toes too numb to step. Wait only for my boot heels to be wandering.
From a Dylan point of view, he has consistently throughout the years, even into his very late career, reinterpreted it in ways that are very surprising. In 1995, for example, he spent the whole of April reinterpreting it night by night in a wonderful version. And then when he'd got it absolutely perfect, he dropped it and didn't play it again.
But what really makes that album work is having really hinted at where he was going with another side of Bob Dylan. Oh, now he was actually doing it for real.
In the jingle jangle morning, I'll come following you.
I think by this point, and it comes through in the music, I think he'd become a creature almost entirely of instinct, moved like a cat, had become almost overnight incredibly sexy. He changed physically, and it was almost an overnight thing. Really, he sort of became the centre of something which previously hadn't existed. He was by himself, a force of nature, and this was starting to tell in the music.
The three albums that Dylan released, two in 1965, one in 1966, I think will forever be held as being Dylan at his peak. Each album redefined not only music but popular culture at the time. Dylan was moving so fast that he was actually losing audiences and gaining bigger ones almost by the month.
You mustn't now take what you need, you think will last. But whatever you wish to keep, you'd better grab it fast.
So you have this first side that's semi-rock and was supposed to be a shock to people at the time. And then on the second side you've got 4 tracks which stand with the greatest poetry, I would say, of the last 300 years. Again, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think it's a claim that's easily justifiable. And it was just Dylan on guitar.
Look out, the saints are coming through, and it's all over now, baby blue.
The songs were now on a much wider scale. Instead of talking about certain injustices in society, Dylan was exploring how and why America in particular had come to a point where such injustices existed. But to take the 3 albums as a whole, you leave Bringing It All Back Home with It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, a folk acoustic song where Dylan posits the differences between authentic and inauthentic existence and sings to, presumably, a woman who has to choose between these 2 ways of life, and he uses imagery about possessions and about mystery, about people at the door, which lead on to the opening of his next album with, as I was about to say, The Mystery Tramp and Like a Rolling Stone. He's singing to someone who's lost everything, and the choice is, do you pick up and start a new life and leave the dead, inauthentic existence behind and move on to something more challenging? And although the song is quite brutal, there's an exultancy in Dylan's delivery that makes you think there is hope.
My feeling of Bob Dylan at the time, in terms of live, and certainly what you see on footage, was he was growing into being a confident performer. To actually be on stage and be himself, rather than to be invoking the spirit of something he really didn't believe in completely. So I think we were starting to see Bob Dylan as his own man.
You walk into the room with a pencil in your hand. See somebody naked. Say, who's that?
There had never been an album like Bringing It All Back Home. And then there had never been an album like Highway 61 Revisited. And then there absolutely certainly had never been anything like a double album, for goodness sake, called Blonde on Blonde. And each one is musically completely different. Each album is as a contender to be the best album of all time. They came at a breathtaking speed. They were all musically completely different, though I think what keeps them together is a cohesive web of imagery. And Dylan at this point, without wanting to sound too ridiculous about it, just seemed to sneeze poetry. Even his press conferences seemed wildly inventive and funny.
Hard on a lot of people, like in Like a Rolling Stone, you're pretty hard on the girl. And in Positively 4th Street, you're pretty hard on the supposed friend. Are you hard on them because you want to torment them or because you want to change their lives and make them know themselves?
I want to needle them.
Who's Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones, I'm not going to tell you his first name. I get sued.
What does he do for a living?
He's a pin boy. He also wears suspenders.
I think Dylan was this mythical creature who revolutionized music, rock music, pop music, folk music, everything in 5 years, Between 1962 and 1966, he made 7 albums. Each one was radically different from the last. He completely changed folk music. He made folk music political. He changed rock music. He made rock music poetic and mysterious and allegorical and mystical. He did all this extraordinary work in just 5 years, and then he exploded, he vanished. He had a motorbike crash and he vanished.
Say, who is that man? You try so hard, but you don't understand. Just what you're gonna say when you get home.
The motorcycle accident, in its effect on Dylan's myth, was extraordinary. In fact, it would have been a great PR stunt if it had been set up for that. So you had the Stones, the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and one of them suddenly went off the radar. What had happened to him became a great mystery, and the need to find out increased his myth exponentially.
And he came back with a rather mysterious country and western album called John Wesley Harding, which was a very interesting but kind of mystical, allegorical work. It sounded like it could have been recorded in 1867. It didn't sound like it had anything to do with the 1960s at all.
I mean, the whole world was going psychedelic pop, spacey albums, and Dylan came out with a sparse, pared-down John Wesley Harding. But it was lyrically so complex and so clearly the same genius who had produced the triumvirate of albums that we're forever referring to, the sort of holy trinity of the mid-60s. It was still clearly the same man. The Vietnam War was hugely in everyone's mind at the time, and Dylan never mentions it, and until the 1990s he never mentioned the Vietnam War at all. But John Wesley Harding was played by soldiers in Vietnam a great deal, and they wrote about it a lot and they discussed it a lot, which is interesting. It was also helped, of course, by the fact that Jimi Hendrix produced one of the greatest ever Dylan covers, if not the greatest cover, with an absolutely astonishing version of All Along the Watchtower. Which certainly fitted the era more than Dylan's album, in the sense of sound. But yes, people were possibly taken aback, but by this point they were just glad to hear Bob Dylan again, and certainly glad to hear a Bob Dylan at the top of his form.
He then made this very corny Nashville record called Nashville Skyline, very corny Nashville love songs. He then made New Morning and Self-Portrait close together, and then he seemed to retreat into his home in Woodstock. He was having children with his wife. I think he was waiting for his contract with his manager Albert Grossman to expire. So for a period of, roughly from 1970 to 1974, he vanished. He didn't seem to exist anymore.
It was like the whole counterculture just almost going around in circles because they didn't know what to do without Dylan being there. And then suddenly, out of the blue, at the start of '74, he announces a huge American tour with the band, and there's a new album, Planet Waves, which in retrospect isn't that great, but it was a Dylan album. That's what people wanted.
And the demand for the tour was unprecedented. I mean, something like 18 million ticket applications. By this point, of course, CBS, who've let Dylan go, who have not actually got him to re-sign to them, realised their error too late. And Dylan records Planet Waves really as a, raised digit to CBS.
In a sense, though, I think in the stuff he did with the band, he was really coasting on his 60s repertoire and his reputation. And then at the end of '74, so this is only, eight or 9 months after Planet Waves, you suddenly get the absolutely amazing album, Blood on the Tracks.
Early one morning the sun was shining, she was lying in bed, wondering if she changed it all, if her hair was still red. If folks, they said their lives together, sure was it gonna be rough. They never did like Mama's homemade dress, Papa's bank book wasn't big enough.
I think Tangled Up In Blue sets the stage. It tells you what the theme of the album is. And it's a fantastic, there's something kind of very up-tempo and very kind of energetic about it. It's just the way Dylan and the musicians work together. It just keeps, it's wonderful the way it just keeps circling around. It keeps circling around and coming back to itself. Each verse sort of seems to build on the same theme. It's got this wonderful circular feel to it.
She was married when they first met, soon to be divorced. He helped her out of a jam, I guess, but he used a little too much force.
That to me is the the ultimate Dylan song, Tangled Up in Blue. I listen to it and I've got films going around in my head. The imagery is so incredibly strong and it's such a poignant song.
It's like the curtain parts and there is this guy and he's tangled up in blue. He's thinking about a relationship. He's going back to find her. They split up again. At the end of the song, he's thinking about how he's going to get back to her. It's the curtain raiser.
Dylan's son, Jacob, has said Blood on the Tracks is like his parents talking to each other. I can't think of a better way of describing that record. It chronicles the breakup of his marriage and, everything started falling apart basically for him.
But all the while he was alone, the past was close behind. He's seen a lot of women, but she never escaped his mind, and he just grew tangled up in blue.
When Bob was looking back at Blood on the Tracks later in the '70s, he said that the thing that had been different about that album was that he was having to learn to do consciously all the things that he'd done unconsciously in the '60s. In the '60s, he was just able to tap into his creative juices at will.
Dylan's writing by this point had become a lot less oblique. It was a lot more confessional, a lot more direct. I think there was less open to interpretation. In the '60s, there was a lot more clever wordplay.
It's a very cathartic album, and obviously Dylan himself is aware of that. That the album is about relationships. It's about a particular relationship, obviously, which is, the overbearing theme of the album.
Someone's got it in for me. They're planting stories in the press. Whoever it is, I wish they cut it out quick. But when they will, I can only guess.
Idiot Wind is a song about vengeance, about anger, about cursing someone who he has fallen out with. It's got this extraordinary beginning. Someone's got it in for me. They're planting stories in the press. It's very interesting in terms of Dylan, because Dylan, of course, was always surrounded by rumours. There were strange rumours about him always circulating in the press. But then he goes on to cursing this woman, and you're an idiot, babe. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. It is, quite a breathtaking thing to say to some woman who you once shared your life with.
And even you yesterday, you had to ask me where it was at.
You know, there's a lot of bitterness in this record. You know, I don't hear any anger in the album there. I think there's a lot of sadness and bitterness all wrapped up. But I don't hear kind of aggression in this album. You know, I don't think it's a nasty album. They're still love songs. Maybe it's they're ballads bemoaning times that have gone, you know, but they are love songs.
It's always difficult with an album that obviously has gone on to be considered an absolute masterpiece for people to look back and you know, remind themselves that not everybody reads things that way. People think that it was well received. Actually, the reaction was very mixed. It's rare for me to compliment the man who wrote it, but Michael Gray in Let It Rock absolutely got it spot on. He said, this is a masterpiece, this rewrites the book. And, most importantly, the one thing that Michael got absolutely right, he said, Dylan has done something that no one has done before, which is 10 years after he was written off. He has delivered something at least the equal of his incredible work.
I could argue, you talk to people on different days, it's certainly Dylan's best album, full stop. It's certainly Dylan's best album of the 70s. It's arguably the best album of all time.
They sat together in the park as the evening sky got dark. She looked at him and he felt a spark tingle up to his bone.
You know, you almost feel like an intruder for listening in sometimes on that album. It's unrelentingly sad.
Love doesn't end in some kind of happy stasis, that it always ends either in separation or in reconciliation. You're always moving on to the next stage. Nothing lasts forever. Life is sad, life is a bust. Do what you can, do what you must.
Stopped into an old hotel with a neon burning bright.
Desire was a more commercial album than Dylan had been producing up until that point. It may have been consciously so. After all, Blood on the Tracks was a commercial success to a degree, and a high degree, but by the standard of the album, it didn't actually sell as much as its brilliance justified. So it may have been deliberate, or it may have just been Dylan, as usual, doing something new, but Desire had a completely different sound to anything Dylan had done, or has done since.
He got Scarlett Rivera in on violin, who had a very strong effect on the sound, so the whole thing acquired this strange sound, which is partly gypsy music, partly Eastern European music, partly Yiddish music.
Pistol shots ring out in a barroom night. It's a Betty Valentine from the floor above. She sees a bartender in a pool of blood. Cries out, they've killed my love.
The whole style of songwriting was different, and that was partly because he hooked up with this guy Jack Levy, who was a screenwriter and a theatre director. It gave the songs a very different spirit. They were much more cinematic.
Here comes the story of the hurricane, the man the authorities came to blame for something that he never done.
Reuben Carter had been a boxer, middleweight contender in the mid-60s, who had, he said, been unjustly convicted of murder. What's interesting about it is, almost for the first time since the early 60s, Bob was prepared to take on a case that was current. He wasn't writing about something that harked back to the Bible or just something that happened to himself. He was actually taking something that was out of the newspapers and turning it into instant journalistic songwriting.
But that's what Dylan does. He takes something, he absorbs it, he goes through it absolutely 100%, and then he moves on. He's done the same with everything he's done in his life. When he went electric, he seemingly in interviews despised his earlier self. When he went religious, he was breathing fire and brimstone on all of us, sinners. And then he just sheds off a layer of skin, as he'd say, and moves on to something else.
Be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble, you might like to dance. Maybe the heavyweight champion of the world.
He has said that he was out on tour in America at the end of '78, and I think he was in San Diego, and somebody threw a cross on stage, and he was out of his head and just feeling ill and didn't want to be there, and he picked the cross up and stuck it in his pocket, and he says he saw Jesus.
It may be the
And in the way of these conversions, it was a complete reversal of everything that he'd ever thought in his life. Suddenly, for him and his art being the centre of the universe, God was now the centre of the universe.
He was fired by a religious enthusiasm. I don't like the message of those tours, to put it mildly. Dylan is singing as one of the elect who's chosen to condemn the rest of us for our sins. But the fire and brilliance of his performances in 79 and 80, one could make an argument for performing skills being the pinnacle of Dylan's career. But I think it should also be mentioned that Dylan has, since then, and to this day, still performs, and you never know what you're going to get on any given night. So there's always the next show.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't play anything really after that, really, until we get to the end of the 80s. There's a whole sort of missing 15 years of Dylan's career, when there's some interesting music, but none of it really sounds, I don't know, it doesn't sound real. It doesn't sound as if he's fully into it. And what's interesting, by comparison, is that on the last two records he's made, on Love and Theft and on Modern Times, by producing them himself, he has managed to go back to a very, very simple sound using his live band. It's as if he's learnt the lesson that he was trying to learn 30 years beforehand.
I think the performances remain breathtaking, and I think in fact it's quite important to go back and listen to them and look at them again. It is shattering how intense his presence is, how uncompromisingly he presents what he feels as the inner core of the song, however tragic, however despairing or morbid.
Dylan seems to give you some kind of insight, or have some insight into this stuff that none of the rest of us do.
He wasn't so much kind of capturing the times as he kind of was the times. I think he was definitely kind of tapping into a general mood. Dylan had a fantastic antennae for picking up on this.
Nobody feels any pain. Tonight as I stand inside the rain.
The great thing about Dylan is that he never actually sat and explained his songs, and he always talked about idiots like me who analyse this stuff and, you know, think they have some insight into them. He was always so dismissive of it because you're not inside his head, and I think that's the key with Dylan, is you never really know quite what's going on.
We were seeing the birth and genesis of a genius, a man who strode across decades and still does, thankfully, to this day. He is a giant, and here we were seeing the giant being born, the giant being realised. And the beauty of those albums, the beauty of recorded music, is that it allows you to be there. You are there, and you can hear the birth of something very exciting.
Like all the best art, it does get better over time. You can listen to it like you look at a painting, and it can kind of just pull you in. It's like diving into a kind of dream world.
It is frankly absurd to talk about anybody else in the same term. Dylan overarches everything, and there is nobody that comes close to Dylan. There is Dylan, and there is everybody else.